We have been starting companies together since we were 19 years old. We joined our first tech startup. I use the royal we because we have very similar career paths, but we both decided to get into tech very early in our careers. Built our first company that can't really even be called a company because it failed quite miserably. We didn't know what we were doing when we started our first company in college. Even though I sold my car to start it, it was a good learning experience, but it didn't get very far. So we decided to learn from founders when we were in our early 20s, and we got into really small early stage startups in a bunch of different jobs, sales, business development, product. And we learned firsthand what those functions meant and what it meant to actually execute on those different functions as a founder. And over the years, we've had an opportunity to be in a lot of these different types of roles and also to launch a lot of different companies, software companies, e-commerce companies, and School16 is our latest venture and the one that actually we're most passionate about. The reason why we're really passionate about this education venture, School16, that we started is we have been in higher education actually over the last couple of years. So we had yet another career change years ago, and we both got into higher ed. For me, I was running programs at NYU. I'm still there, but I'm actually transitioning out. I run technology investments for a venture capital fund at NYU for Redeem. He's been a professor teaching entrepreneurship and management. And we met a lot of undergraduate students, graduate students, PhDs throughout the years. And we learned that most people don't actually get the right type of context about what these different functions in tech mean, how they apply to entrepreneurship, and how they apply to different jobs that you can get in technology that can actually help you be successful as a leader down the line. And so we started School16 to help people learn about the roles, learn about the skills that are most important to succeed in tech, and actually help them get into tech, whether it's from the perspective of an entrepreneur or an operator that wants to help run teams within technology companies. Now here at School16, we do focus on non-technical roles, non-technical entrepreneurs as well. If you are technical, it's still the right place for you. If you're an engineer, for example, sitting in the audience, you may want to learn about what the business functions are, so you're in the right place as well. But certainly we think that not having coding skills or that kind of technical proficiency shouldn't be a barrier for people to launching companies or to helping run startups and join technology companies, which is why we started School16.
So here's how the next hour or so is going to run. We wanted to focus the conversation on what you need to do, as you saw in the slide beforehand. Whatever an entrepreneur needs to do, startup founder needs to do to learn before they launch their company. Now, spoiler alert, a lot of the stuff you end up truly learning, the skills that you end up developing have to be done on the job. They can be done on the job when you're starting a company. They can also be done when you get a job working for somebody else, essentially getting paid to learn. That's how we learned a lot of our skills as well. But we're going to cover these topics for the next hour or so. And here's how it's going to work. We broke up into 4 different topics of conversation: finding co-founders, customer discovery, product development. The two are tied really closely together, and getting customers, because a lot of people are curious about what it takes to get your first customers from a sales and marketing perspective. We're going to try to keep that discussion pretty focused. So it's going to be 10 minutes of us talking, basically, us asking each other's questions and responding to them. And then 5 minutes we want to allocate to make sure that we address questions that come up for you. So if you have questions, there's 2 ways that you can make sure that we see them. Obviously, dropping them into the chat as you think of them as we're having the discussion is one way. Also, again, because we're a small group and because I think there's some value in you getting to know each other and meeting each other, we will say, if you can, again, enable your video and unmute yourself and go ahead and ask your question in front of everybody in the room. That's how it's going to work. And Kristen will kindly keep time on us, because Sergey and I can talk about this topic. Literally, we can sit here for 6 hours and talk about this easily. So we need to make sure that the conversation is focused today so you can get the most out of it as possible. Again, this conversation is being recorded, as you can see. If you want to get access to this recording, all that we ask is we're going to drop a link to the survey at the end of this call. Please complete the survey to give us your feedback on how this event went, and you'll get access to the recording within 24 to 48 hours.
I want to mention as well, before we get started, that we have a deadline coming up for our Technology Career Acceleration Program. I saw in the chat that some of you folks are here to learn more about that. Although we're not going to spend too much time here talking about the program, what I do want to mention is this is specifically a program for people that want to help develop skills and learn about the different functions in tech that are non-technical in nature. We focus in this program, this 2-month part-time program, on sales, marketing, product, and operation. Sometimes people join our program because they want to get into tech jobs and get into startup jobs. And that's all they want. Sometimes people join our program because they want to be entrepreneurs. They want to learn about how a startup operates and they want to launch a company someday of their own. So you may be here for different reasons, but the program is a good fit for a lot of those different types of reasons. So that initial deadline that's coming up is on February 15th. And the reason why we're mentioning it here today is because we prioritize scholarships for people that apply early. They're all need-based scholarships. So when people have financial need, we always try to offer something to make it affordable. But this is a program that people typically take, again, in order to learn about the different functions and how it applies to either entrepreneurships or directly in getting a startup job or tech job. To, again, provide context. That's what we're all about, and make sure to provide professional context so you can make the right decisions.
Okay, awesome. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen here so that we can just get started with the conversation. So again, the first part of the conversation, the discussion that we want to have. And again, folks, as you think of questions, please feel free to drop them into the chat while we're going here. And in about 10 minutes, we'll start addressing them. The first one is one that we get asked quite a lot, which is how do you find a co-founder? For non-technical people, it's oftentimes how you find a technical co-founder. But obviously, if you're technical, you want to find a CEO type, somebody that can actually do the sales. So tell me, I mean, what advice would you give for somebody that's looking to find a co-founder or even develop the skill to attract a high quality person to the team?
Yeah. So one thing that I'll say is that, obviously ideal scenario for anyone in terms of finding a co-founder is you have people in your network that you know really well, that you know the quality of their work, and you start collaborating with them. That's why you see so many founding teams that are best friends, right? They were best friends in school. They met at work, perhaps. They met at a certain program or a team that they were part of together, and they decide to work on something on the side, and that turns into a startup. But the hard thing for most people is that most of us don't necessarily have a bestie or a good friend that we can automatically start startups with. That's the hard part. And that means that you have to get really good at recruiting a founder or recruiting a founding team. I will say that as a founder, recruiting and attracting talent is something that every single founder is going to have to be good at, regardless of whether you're technical or not technical. So actually starting to work that muscle is really, really important. But the way that, at least for us and many of the startup founders that we've coached or invested in, have found founding team members when they didn't have that best friend, or in my case, a twin brother that you could start something with, is actually running a recruiting process. Now, startups are inherently hard and inherently risky. So there's only going to be certain people that are even interested in working with you on something that's completely unproven. What that means is you have a much higher likelihood of attracting a partner or a collaborator that can turn into a partner when you are actually making meaningful momentum on the project yourself. So if you start cold emailing tech people or engineers on LinkedIn, and you've done nothing for your startup, guess what? It's going to be really hard for you to attract a high quality engineer. Whereas if you actually started proving that there's demand for your startup and actually started proving that there's a market for it, or maybe even start generating sales or execute on the business side yourself, it becomes actually a lot easier to attract people to collaborate with. And the way that co-founder relationships usually develop is, first, you reach out to people and you ask them to collaborate, to work with you on a project. You're working on this startup and you want to collaborate with it together. And you work with each other on a short-term project, typically about a month or a couple of months. And during that couple-month process, you start to assess, what is their level of commitment? Do they have the right skills that I actually need for this company right now? Do we trust each other, right? What is our communication style? right? All of these things, the communication, the trust, is actually the key component of what you're testing for when you're collaborating people for an early stage founding team. And so I think a lot of people think, I need to go find a co-founder right now. And it's almost like I'm proposing to somebody for a marriage without them even knowing me. That's not how it works. It's still a dating process. It's still a process of collaboration when you're earning trust, which is why it's better to start with friends, or at least people that you've worked with before, to collaborate with. And over time, as you develop that trusting relationship, and as you see that your skills are complementary and the right skills for this business, is when you then put pen to paper and agree on formalizing the co-founder relationship and actually making it official. But again, there's no shortcut. You have to do some recruiting, you have to do some outreach, you have to ask people who they know that might fit that particular role and have that particular skill that you need. And then by collaborating over time, that's how you actually find people that could be co-founders and founding team members.
Yeah, and then to expand on that a little bit, I will say, not to brush over this, but when you're doing your outreach, there's a way to optimize this process. Yes, at some point you may need to send cold messages to people to recruit that type of person if you literally have no one in your network. But the very first place you should start is actually reaching out to people in your network that you think might know the people that you want access to. So, if you're in school, the easiest place to start is other students or maybe even professors, right? If you're already out of college and you're in your first or second job, it might be people that you trust at work. Obviously, if you're working on a side project, you want to make sure you're communicating this only to people that you trust, or people that are other alumni from the school that you went to, or just people in your extended network. Quite frankly, even friends of friends or acquaintances of your parents and people like that could be a decent place to start. And reaching out to those people first and asking, who do you know that might be interested in working on this idea? Who do you know that is technical, for example, if you're looking for an engineer that might be interested in helping out? And of course, if you do run out of those people, then as Sergey said, running a true recruiting process is really the best way to go about it. Finding people that you think have the skills that you need and evaluating them.
Now, just to give you a little bit more context of what we mean by recruiting process, literally pretend that you're a headhunter and you're a recruiter. What do? They sit on LinkedIn all day, right? So going on LinkedIn, making lists of people that you want to reach out to, start reaching out to them with compelling messages about what you're working on and that you want to chat with them. What we used to do early on, we actually moved to New York 8 years ago and we started a software company. We needed a technical person and we knew no one in the city. And we would just join meetup groups. And actually, if you join meetup groups on meetup.com and you become a member of a group, you can actually go through people's profiles and message them directly within that app. So we would message people directly on Meetup. We would message people directly on LinkedIn. If you're part of the same LinkedIn group with people, you can actually send DMs to them. A lot of people don't know that. Nowadays, you can actually use Instagram for that as well. But the idea is you have to identify what is the skill set that I have that I need for this business that I lack. Let me try to assess people who are likely to be interested in startups based on their profiles online, based on groups that they're part of. And let me reach out to them to get conversations going to see who I vibe well with. Really no shortcut for that.
Another thing you could do is hire a freelancer, hire a contractor, agree on a flat rate that's actually affordable for you, and see if you like working together. We actually found one of our co-founders that way. We hired him on Upwork. It was called Elance at the time. We did, I think, a $1,000 project over the course of a few months, which we invested into the company. That project didn't work out, but we really liked working with that engineer, and we asked him to join us as a co-founder. That can happen as well, obviously, if you have no other place to start, is working with a freelancer, getting access to that person by paying them a little bit, and in the future saying if they're interested in a equity compensation arrangement, right, where they get a percentage of the company instead of a financial commitment. Obviously, you need to have a conversation upfront to see if they're even interested in early stage startups, which are inherently risky. Some people are just looking for a job. Some people just want to be freelancers and not interested about that. You need to evaluate that during your interview process or within the conversations with that person. But that's also another valid way to find a potential partner.
So those are our initial thoughts on becoming good at recruiting and actually finding co-founders, finding talent. What questions do people have? You can feel free to unmute yourself based on anything we just said. What questions do you have?
And again, if you'd like, you can also drop your question into the chat, but we'll pause right now for questions.
Yeah, I just had a thought that it's really, really hard to find a co-founder, and that happened to me. So yeah, really good insight to like play a role of headhunter and actually like find them yourself. like the way that headhunters do. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's a good
Yeah.
advice.
Thank you, Vlad. I appreciate it. And one thing I'll add there is that um, you might find a potential partner that you like, that you jive with for the first month or two, right? And then for some reason, it just does not work out. That can happen too. That's why they call it kind of like founder dating, or there's always analogies to marriage, right? Because working together is actually really hard. You're probably spending a lot of time together as well. And sometimes these things just don't work out. And so that's why working with them for a little while, seeing what happens is great. If it doesn't work out, then you have to continue the search. The trust obviously is going to be the most important aspect of that co-founder relationship. Thank you for that, Vlad. Jessica Tian typed into the chat. She said, how long does finding a co-founder usually take? Excellent question. You might get lucky and you might think about your past coworker that you really loved working with. You pitch them an idea, they love it, you start working together because there's already trust there. It took you a week, right? For a lot of other people, it can take months. If you're at a school or if you're going to specific networking events, sometimes you're not going to meet the right person at that event. Even if you go to a targeted event that's co-founder dating, which for example, NYU hosts all the time, sometimes you don't meet the right people. And so you have to kind of continue to put yourself out there. It can take months. One specific example, we interviewed the founder of FanDuel on our podcast. We have a podcast called The Mentors. And he went to a networking event in Scotland. That's where he's from, when he was starting or thinking about ideas for startups. And he met two engineers, and over the course of a few months, he was just giving them advice on their startup. And then I think 2 or 3 months later, their startup failed, but they liked each other. They developed rapport, and then he recruited them to his own idea, which was something else. And then it pivoted into FanDuel eventually, which obviously ended up being a massive organization.
But I can't underscore enough what I said earlier, which is the thing that will speed up your process and the thing that will help you attract quality people to the team is proving that you have some advantage and something to add to the table. So traction, obviously, on something beyond just sharing an idea is the one best way to do it. But maybe you have some special relationships that can help this business succeed. Maybe you have partnerships or access to companies or people that can help this business succeed, or access to investors that can help this business succeed. So all of these things are very additive, and they add trust, and they help the person feel like you're legitimate and not just someone random with an idea that just wants to use their work and go from there. You really want to build that trust over time.
Okay, great, folks. If you have other questions about this, you can type them into the chat, but we will move on to the next topic that we had prepared.
Great. So one important question is, and you hear this word thrown around a lot, which is customer discovery. That initial process of getting to know customers before you ever even really launch something. You may have heard of the lean startup methodology, books like 4 Steps to the Epiphany, books like, what else? Eric Ries is an author that writes a lot about this. Steve Blank writes a lot about this customer discovery as a way to essentially learn how to build a business that's actually a startup that's going to succeed. That's the hardest part of a venture, is in the beginning, you don't really know exactly what you're selling oftentimes or to whom. So Vadim, how do you develop that initial skill of interviewing customers when you really just have nothing initially but an idea? How do you start?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would think about this in 2 different ways. First of all, we're going to talk about sales towards the end of this conversation. Your customer discovery process is effectively the first time you're practicing doing sales or pitching your product or service. And by the way, even if you have a consumer product that you're creating, it is helpful to talk to customers early on, especially if you have nothing yet. You can also survey customers as other way to collect data and information from customers, but there's nothing like having a one-on-one conversation with somebody to really understand how they think, to give you insights into what your idea could be and how it should evolve. I would say the number one thing to start before you even have any skill in doing this to increase your chances of success in these types of conversations is to actually focus on an industry or a sector where you have some experience. So for example, if you've been doing some sales for a while, start talking to salespeople because you'll know how to speak their language. You'll know their pain points. They'll probably respond to you if reaching out cold, for example, just because they know that you come from the same world. That's one way of thinking about it. Another way of thinking about it is where your domain expertise might be. So let's say you just finished a grad program and you spent several years studying something very, very specific, or a PhD program, right? Well, again, by having that domain expertise, you're giving incentive to somebody else to get on the phone with you and talk to you to have that customer discovery process to give you that insight, because that's going to be the hardest part in the beginning. Is before you have anything, before you have a developed idea, you want to start talking to customers to help give you insights into that idea so that you know what to build in the future. And you need to incentivize people to get on the phone with you. Of course, again, you want to start with your network, but pretty quickly you're going to run out of those people, and you're going to be reaching out to people cold or asking for introductions. And if you're a domain expert in a particular field, then I would say, again, that'll help you have a more informed conversation during the customer discovery process. Obviously, nothing's going to teach you how to do it until you do it yourself. The other thing that I would do, again, if you don't necessarily have a startup idea yet and you want to get good at that role, then try to find either an internship or a job that it puts you in a customer services oriented position. It could be sales, it could be BDR, it could be client services, it could honestly even be tech support, where you're talking to customers every single day, hearing their objections, hearing their concerns, understanding how to address their concerns to your team internally, right? To make sure that people are acting on whatever their problems are so that those features are being built. If you're building a software company, right? Whatever it may be. If you put yourself in a position where you just constantly have to react to customers, even if it's not for your own startup idea, you're going to develop that muscle. You're going to get better at it. And you're going to start to understand what you need to do during this customer discovery process to collect data to then inform your product decisions. Because that's in the end of the day why you're even doing this.
And I want to also clarify, if for some folks, customer discovery might be a new phrase, or just what it really means. Even though it's really the first step in the sales process, or the pre-sales process is the discovery process. Anybody here that's been in the sales role knows that there's a discovery process with your customer, potential customer, or your lead that you do before you sell them anything. Customer discovery is really the practice of talking to particular customer segments, or particular individuals that you segment in a way that you think is maybe the right customer for you. It's just a guess in the beginning, but you start to validate that, and actually identifying that the problem that you think they have exists, that it's a real problem, real pain point, and they're actively trying to solve it. Or if you don't quite know what problem to solve yet, it's identifying what is the most top of mind problem for them in their job, in their day-to-day life, or whatever it might be for that particular customer segment, right? So for example, if you wanted to build a product for new moms, right? People that are going through the process of maternity and learning how to be a mom, you might, before you say, I'm going to start a fitness product for new moms, you might want to interview 50 new moms to see what is the hardest thing for them after becoming a new mom. Is it fitness? Is it staying fit and something that has to do with it? Or maybe is it something completely different? And as you start identifying those problems, you can dig deeper and deeper with people to actually learn whether the problems are real, and then actually start presenting solutions to them down the line. This is why actually a lot of talented product managers become entrepreneurs, and a lot of talented entrepreneurs go back later on in life and become product managers, because actually the job is very similar. Product managers, literally their job is to talk to customers to get insights on their problems, and then translate that to developers to make product decisions before the product actually even exists. So PMs, that's part of the reason why we actually focus on at the School16 program, we focus on product for 2 weeks out of the program, because it's such an important skill for entrepreneurs and anybody that wants to be in tech, really understanding what a PM does. They're really cross-functional between entrepreneurship and those different roles.
The other thing I want to mention here in the last 5 minutes of this particular discussion is how to actually run a customer discovery process. So, getting good at it does take practice, but the one thing that you need to keep in mind when trying to get insights from customers is you're trying to collect data. You're not trying to pitch them the idea. And that's that's kind of the biggest difference between customer discovery and sales. Yes, it could be part of the sales process. And if you're in sales, you know that you need to establish pain and collect information as well, do a needs analysis and the like to get to make sure that the value of your product is aligned. But the customer discovery process is all about learning from the customer. That's all it is. And the way to get good at that is to make sure that you're, first of all, obviously coming prepared with whatever questions you want to ask, but also that you're having a dialogue and an open-ended conversation that you're letting flow in the direction that the customer is taking, so that you know that you're focusing on the things that the customer cares about. And there you need to get good at throughout this process of hearing what the customer says, hearing when they talk about something that might really be important to them, something that might be passionate for them, a problem area that they have that they really want to solve, or when they're talking about a problem that you may have brought up that they just don't care about. And that could be really nuanced, but having that dialogue in an open-ended way, making sure that if a customer starts going in a particular rabbit hole, you let them do that, even if it doesn't match whatever the problem you thought they should care about or whatever the solution you're considering, if you do have some kind of idea in mind. Let them do that, because oftentimes during that conversation or that part of the conversation, something will come out that will give you actually relevant insight into what you're trying to accomplish.
The biggest mistake we see entrepreneurs make from time and time again is spending 6 months, or even I've seen people spend a year or multiple years trying to develop an amazing product that they think everybody's going to love, only to find out that when they launch it, people don't actually need it, or the problem isn't as prevalent as they thought it was. And that's just we really want people to avoid that, which is why we think the first step is to intimately understand your customers as much as you can before you get started building anything.
And remember, this isn't just one or two conversations that you're going to have. It's going to have to be a lot of the work that you do early on as a founder. Now, again, if you're going to be doing sales, for example, right, then you're essentially just starting the sales process with people, and eventually it'll result in revenue. But in the beginning, it might not if you don't have a product yet, right? And so for us, for example, when we were building a sales software company a number of years ago, in the beginning, we had a bunch of assumptions about the problems that we wanted to solve for salespeople. We didn't know if it was salespeople or sales managers or directors. We didn't know what their biggest problems were. We were just kind of making way too many assumptions. And we had probably about 75 conversations over the course of 3 months with people at different levels in the sales organization, VPs of sales, director, sales manager, sales representative, right? Just to really get insight into what they needed. Now, does that mean that you have to have 75 calls for any company that you launch before you can actually have enough insight to make some product decisions? Absolutely not. Sometimes you'll have 10 calls or 10 conversations, and you just see so much correlation that you have a lot of conviction into what you're doing. There's also other ways to collect data, like I mentioned, like surveying, for example, or writing some copy and spending $200 or $300 on ads to see if people resonate with that copy, right? There's different ways to run that test. But the customer discovery process, you do have to have a meaningful number of conversations, a statistically significant amount of conversations, in order to actually start proving some of your assumptions, either validating them or invalidating them.
Great. So really important topic, customer discovery, and really the first step. What questions do folks have about this part of the founder journey, or this particular skill that you need to develop as a founder, the skill of interviewing potential customers and figuring out customer segments? Any questions, folks? Feel free to type them in the chat or unmute yourself if you'd like.
Okay, folks. If not, that's okay. We will move on to the next topic of conversation, which is actually tangentially relevant to this one. And that is, once you start getting some insights into your product, or even if, let's say, you're a domain expert and you have an idea on what you want to build, maybe you're coming in from a field where you already talked to a bunch of folks and they've already validated your concept, you want to start actually developing a product so that you can test it out in the real world. And quite frankly, a lot of entrepreneurs will wait way too long to actually build something real, especially when it comes to software. The only way to truly see if people find value from the software that you're building is to actually get it in the hands of the users that will get value from it. So Sergey, how do you go about developing the MVP, the minimum viable product, or prototyping it out? And how do you even develop the skill to start understanding how to test the products that you might be building?
Yeah, so product testing actually can come in a lot of different ways. And it's not even necessarily having to have a fully built out, minimum viable product that you launch to people and have them use. Certainly, if you're technically savvy, or if you have friends that are engineers that are helping you, and you can build something in a couple of weeks or a month that you can actually give people and let them use and interact with. And so you can actually start improving on the product itself based on customer feedback. Nothing will replace direct customer feedback on a product that they can use and touch and feel and react to. But if you're building especially if you're building the type of business or product that may take months of development, you shouldn't and you don't want to wait months before you start doing product testing. There's a bunch of different ways you can do product testing and start getting reactions from the market to see if there might be demand for it. And by the way, remember we mentioned earlier, the more you can prove demand, the easier it might actually be for you to find initial investors and find co-founders as well that can help you out. So again, it really highly depends on the product. So by the way, folks, if you have specific products that you're thinking of building, feel free to let us know in the chat as well. If you have, you don't have to tell us your idea, but you certainly can, because that could help to contextualize it, because it really does depend on the product. But you know, you can do a lot of different ways to test it. Now, one way to do it, and I think one of the best ways to do it, is once you get customer insights, start creating visual prototypes of what something might look like once it's actually ready. And there's so many different tools out there to create visual prototypes that actually can make something feel and look like it's real, right? Figma is a really popular tool. You can create renderings on Canva. You can create renderings for mobile apps on proto.io. So there's a lot of different tools that you can use for prototyping in order to actually create something that looks like it's going to be a real product, simulates a real product, lets somebody see what different screens look like, etc. And then you can go back to the people that you did customer discovery conversations with and start showing it to them, right? Ideally in person if you can, but over Zoom works really well as well. And doing a screen share and showing them and getting their reaction on what the different product features and functionality is, and actually then making real product decisions and start coding or building, right? If it's not a software product, based on people's real reactions on what the visual thing looks like. That is showing something visual is always much better than just verbal. And of course, showing something that's real that they can play around with is even better than visual. But again, we're trying to get you to create some process that gets you to the customer feedback from the prototype as quickly as possible. The other way to do it is you can actually start testing different web pages and landing pages that make the product feel or look real. There's something called concierge tests, right? Where a lot of startups launch, where they'll actually create a front end, like a web page. You can use WordPress, you can use tools like Webflow that have relatively low ramp up time to learn how to actually spin up a website. Even other tools like Weebly, for example, are good enough now to create web pages so you can start testing. There's a bunch of other ones out there. But actually spinning up landing pages and web pages where you can simulate what the product would look like, but actually on the back end, you're doing everything manually, right? There has been food delivery services where they let you text message to deliver food, and then the founders themselves go and they run and deliver the food just to see what the process looks like. Literally, that is how, like DoorDash is a company that I believe they just went public this year. That's how they started. They had a process that looked like it was a real business with real delivery people, but they literally were doing it manually on the back end. So anytime you have a product idea, think about it. What is the simplest feature that I can release or show to the world where it's not real, but it feels real and I can actually do things manually on the back end? This is also where ideas for pre-orders start with, right? People can actually go on your website and they can click to buy something, but they don't actually have the ability to buy it, right? It's just a fake button that you have on there, but you can start measuring where there's real demand with fake buttons. Launch pages, there's tools like LaunchRock out there that you can actually start collecting people's email addresses. Famously, Robinhood started this way. They literally built a simple landing page where they said, transaction fee, no transaction fees, you can start trading immediately. Now the product didn't exist, but they said type in your email to get notified, and they created an incentive structure where you should invite people and to get moved up on the list. And they got like 1 million signups. Now, obviously they figured out a viral loop and they got a little lucky, but the point is they had no product. They were able to validate demand with that product with a simple landing page collecting email addresses. Collecting someone's email address is actually a transaction. They're not paying you something, but they're giving you something of value, proving to you that they want that thing, even if that thing doesn't exist. So there's sequential steps you can take to prove that something might work and there might be demand. Taking an email, actually getting someone to use something that's fake or that you're doing manually. And that leads all the way up to eventually what you will have, which is a real transaction, which is taking people's credit cards for an actual process or a function or service or product that you're actually selling them. So that's really the initial process of prototyping that you can do.
Paul Graham, who is the founder of Y Combinator, which is a very famous startup accelerator that probably most of you are aware of, he famously has a quote that says that successful entrepreneurs do things that don't scale. And especially in the beginning, when you're developing a product, you need to do that. And that alludes to what Sergey was talking about, which is running a manual process, maybe making something feel like it's real, like there's an algorithm behind it, for example, but actually doing it manually in the very beginning. one of the other biggest mistakes that we see entrepreneurs make early on is they have a great idea for a business, for example, or one that they think is great. They might even have the technical skills or the technical abilities or a technical co-founder, and they just put their heads down and start building. And then they turn around 6 months or a year later, they built this awesome product, or again, something they think is awesome, and they have no users for it. And it's super kludgy, it's massive, it has a ton of features, but nobody's actually using it. And that's one of the biggest mistakes that you can make. Yes, it's important to be a visionary. Yes, it's important to think about your product and what it's going to look like in the future. But all these plans oftentimes change as you start talking to customers, as you start getting customers, as you start understanding what your product market fit is or what your value to the market is. And so the best thing you can do, and that's why MVPs, minimum viable products, are so important to think about when you're building something in the very beginning, in the early days, is you want to build something as quickly as possible that actually brings value to your customer segment, or the customer segment that you want to serve, or the customer segment that you're assuming will get value from your product or service, and get it out into the market as quickly as possible to start seeing how the customers react to it. Superhuman is a great example. It's a paid email service that people use. That founder, when they built their first version of the product, he sat on every single, first of all, they made it so that you had to get on a call with the founder to get access to this invite only email service. He still does every single call. Maybe not today, but when I read about it 6 months ago, he was still doing it. They've been growing pretty quickly. That creates exclusivity, but it also makes sure that he's collecting data from these customers. And in the very beginning, they focused on having the coolest email service that was secure, with a kind of some bare bones feature that they ended up building on in the future. But they wanted to provide the initial value in the very beginning before just building a monstrosity of a product that, quite honestly, people might be frustrated with if it's too difficult to figure out how to use. So figure out what you can build of value in the shortest amount of time. You can do that oftentimes with low code or no code solutions like the ones that we mentioned. You can have things running manually in the back end, but the whole point is to get something out into the market as quickly as possible so you can start testing it and getting feedback from real customers.
Now you might say, hey guys, I really don't know how to do any of this stuff, testing, building landing pages, testing prototypes, designing things. How do you even start doing that? There is no shortcut to that. I will say, if you have an idea for a project, start tackling it one thing at a time, right? Start exploring what it's like to use these different landing page builders. Start testing things maybe on Instagram or a platform that you're comfortable with actually designing something for, to see if you can collect demand for it there. You have to start somewhere, and eventually you will get more and more comfortable with these tools and this kind of testing over time. And obviously another great way to do it is to go work for a startup and learn from founders how they do it, and get into a job where you actually get to see how products are developed and how, let's say, a marketing team tests messaging, or a product marketing team launches a new product by testing messaging for a new product online to get demand for that product. There are actual jobs where people do this every single day. You don't have to get a job to learn how to do it as a founder. You can learn through experimentation yourself. Certainly, we learned a lot through experimentation, but oftentimes you might want to learn on somebody else's dime.
All right, we'll pause here before moving into the final topic of conversation of the hour. If you have a question, feel free to unmute yourself or drop it into the chat.
So questions on the prototyping and testing here. So Jessica had a question. How do you retain interested customers when your product still doesn't exist yet? This is a great question. That is also really hard to do, right? You have to keep engaging people in some way. So initially, let's say you might be building a list of people, an email list of people who want to find out when your product launches, right? Maybe that's how you start validating it, kind of like Robinhood did. The way that you would want to make sure that they're still interested and engaged is actually, one way to do it is to continue sending them regular updates about the progress with the business, right? That's one way to do it. People want to see under the hood what it's like to run a company and start a business. And they get really excited when a new startup that they're following actually shows them under the hood. Famously, Buffer is a scheduling tool for marketers that did this really, really well early on. They're still very transparent about all their processes, and that's how they get their community engaged. Another way to do it is to share thought leadership about the industry or about the problem that you're actually trying to solve. So maybe your product doesn't exist yet, but maybe there's other ways you can help those customers solve the particular problem by sharing advice, sharing knowledge, in some sort of newsletter or blog post that you can share. So certainly you want to keep engaging people. But then once you actually have something to show, right, whether it's visual, let people feel special. Actually tell them, hey, we're doing an invite only initial alpha test where we're asking people to give feedback on our initial prototypes, and only 10 people are going to be allowed into this. And you actually hop on calls with them and engage them by showing them the product, or maybe showing them the product over email as well. So there's a bunch of different ways to do it.
One way that we did it for that sales software company before we had certain features built out is we would have our developer, who's also a designer, sketch it out, what the feature might look like, and then we would create an image that we would send in an email, and we would highlight like 1, 2, and 3 on that image, and we'd ask our early customers or early people that had customer discovery conversations with us to rank the order in which they would love to see that feature. And that was just a really easy way to engage with somebody. And by the way, these days, you don't have to have a designer to do a quick mockup like that. Canva.com lets you do a lot of mockups. Sergey mentioned proto.io. You can do a lot of this work yourself. It might take some time, but you can do a lot of this work yourself, and it's one easy, quick way to engage with a prospective customer.
I'll also, in the spirit of showing under the hood, right? Even with School16, when we launched School16, we started doing it. We started hosting essentially events where people could learn topics by coming to our events and learning from experts that we would invite through our network. But then once we had an actual program that we were developing for people, we did that customer discovery process that Vadim was talking about. We would talk to potential students and talk about what they needed. And then we would keep them engaged and interested by being the first people to actually see our syllabus for the program that we're developing, and being the first one to help inform that syllabus and what those classes look like, right, for the program. So continuously finding ways to talk to your customers and get their feedback and making them feel heard is the way you'll keep them engaged.
Great. Any other questions before we move on to our last topic?
Great. Okay, feel free, by the way, at any point, if you have a question, you don't have to wait to type it. If you have a question based on anything that we say, it might not be clear. There's no such thing as a bad question or a dumb question. We're throwing out a lot of different terms here. Vadim and I have been in tech for about 10 years, so there's obviously a lot of information in our heads. We try to make it accessible to you all if you have a little bit less experience, but certainly ask questions if there's something that's not clear for you when we're describing it. So this is actually one of the hardest parts for most people, because you can do a lot of experimentation and customer discovery, but then how do you get to the next step? So Vadim, how do you transition from the discovery process to the actually sales or marketing and actually starting to get your first customers, getting paid for the thing that you're created? When does that happen? When is the right time? And how do you actually start getting paid?
Yeah. The short answer to that question is you have to get comfortable with asking somebody to make a purchase. And in the beginning, when you don't have anything, obviously that's going to be difficult. But once you have some kind of product developed that you think you're providing enough value for somebody, you have to have that conversation. So in a B2B sales capacity, for example, if you're selling to other businesses, it's actually coming up with a sales process. Like, how is that process going to look like? So if you have one stakeholder, one decision maker that you're selling to, plan out your call that you're going to have ahead of time, and think about when in the call you're going to ask if they have budget, or ask if they'd be willing to invest in the solution. Usually, by the way, it should happen after you've established pain, after you've established that there's going to be some return on investment with your solution as well. It's going to be uncomfortable for sure if you've never done it before, but going for the close, for example, asking people to actually commit money to get the value out of whatever it is you have to offer is something you have to get comfortable with.
I actually have a really specific personal story from when we started that sales software business. We had been developing an initial version of the product that was pretty bare bones, but we felt like it was a MVP, right? Minimally viable product, which means that it provides at least a minimum amount of value for someone where they may be willing to buy it. And this is after a couple months of development, talking to a bunch of customers. We were ready to make our first sale. And there was this one person that had used it for 2 months for free because we just wanted his feedback. And he kept using it, kept using the product, and kept, saying, hey, I'll be able to pay you guys soon, but just was not paying us, was not, not paying for the product, not willing to put in his credit card, always had an excuse for not doing it. And, we had a bunch of things we tried to do. We tried to get him to onboard more of his salespeople so he saw more value. And he actually used the product almost every single day. So it was pretty clear to us that he liked it. It's just for some reason, he wasn't putting his credit card and giving us his credit card information. Well, first of all, we didn't even have a way to accept the credit card at first. We actually had to call him and get it. So that was like the one hard thing, is physically, this was before Stripe existed, believe it or not. So Stripe now is a payment processor you can use to accept payments. Couldn't do that before. And so we had to figure out how to get him to actually pay. So one day, I sent him an email. I said, Marty, it was his name. I said, Marty, are you ready to buy the product? You've been using it for a couple of months. We can't keep extending the trial for you. What's going on here? And I get yet another email from him saying, Sergey, please extend the trial by a couple of weeks. I know I'll be able to give it buy it in a couple of weeks. And I was incredibly frustrated at this point because I didn't want to let this person continue using the product for free. It meant that he either was not valuable enough or he was just a tire kicker. So I was on the way to a conference like at 8:30 in the morning in New York. I was sitting in a bus and thinking, what am I going to say to this person? Because I'm about to call him right now and tell him, look, there's no more trial. You either have to pay for the product or you can't use the product anymore. And so I thought of something and I gave him a call and I said, Marty, listen, I cannot extend the trial for you anymore. What is the barrier for you here? Why can't you buy the product? Seems like you're using it every day. He said, look, I just need to get approval from my boss, I'm going to bring it up at the team meeting. I'm going to get you a bunch of users. The same thing that he kept saying over and over again. And I said, Marty, are you getting value from this product? Is it helpful for you? He said, yes, I love it. I use it every day. I want to tell everybody about it. I'm like, that's great, because look, I have a board meeting on Friday. We didn't even have a board, but
it was us.
We were the board. But I said, look, I have a board meeting on Friday. And the first question that the board is going to ask me is, do you have users? And yes, we do. Marty, you're one of them. And what's going on? Are they buying the product? And so what am I supposed to tell my board? If you're getting the value from the product, but you're not able to buy, I don't know what to tell them on Friday. And later that day, he gave us his credit card. He emailed us actually his credit card information, and we were able to charge the card and get that first license, first sale. So the first sale is always the hardest. It was frustrating. It was stressful. I did not want to be a hard ass with him on the phone that day, but sometimes you really have to get comfortable with actually, if people are getting value, actually getting a transaction from them. At some point, you will have to get comfortable doing that.
By the way, it's a classic negotiation tactic to say, like, especially if you're buying a car, right? I have to go talk to my manager to talk about another party that's not in the room, and that is the forcing function. So that's an example of a sales story, but obviously getting customers is going to be different for every single product or service. It depends who you're targeting, right? Business, consumer, and the like, what value you have to offer. And so in order to get customers as quickly as possible, you're going to have to experiment a lot, quite frankly, especially if you've never done that before. And you're really going to have to do that work to learn how to manage your customer acquisition process and to how to manage your sales funnel even, right? Again, it's going to be different for everybody. The first place you should start is thinking about where your customers spend their time, right? So for example, we had a couple of folks, 2 women on the show that started a company where they sold, that taught children how to read. And they sold this book that they wrote, and also this stuffed animal that came with the book that kind of incentivized children to want to play with the physical product. And in the very beginning, what they did to get to $1 million in revenue per year is literally they would reach out to relevant Instagram accounts and ask them to share their product, and they would send them a free copy of the book. And they would even send them a free copy of the book, even if they didn't share their product, just so to delight them and to wow them. And I know for a fact that one of those co-founders did that every single day herself for about a year, and then eventually they started to delegate that to somebody else. That was their customer acquisition process in the very beginning. That's all they did. They probably tried some other tests, it didn't work, but that's all they did, and they got to $1 million in revenue. But the reason why it worked for them is because that was the type of product that would resonate with people. They could actually send a physical product to relevant Instagram accounts that then had people that followers, I should say, with whom that product resonated, right? Again, if you're selling another type of product, you might have to go through LinkedIn and reach out to people directly that way, right? There's going to be different ways to get access to your particular customer segment. By the way, you may be making assumptions about which customers might get value from your product or service, and those assumptions might be incorrect. And again, that's part of the testing process that you're running. But what you're going to have to learn how to do when you're running these experiments is, what does the customer acquisition cycle and process, what does the sales funnel look like for my particular product or service? It's going to be different for every single offering.
I want to emphasize what Vadim just said, because here today, we're all talking about what skills should you acquire or look to acquire as a founder or before you become a founder. What he's talking about here is actually the skill of understanding how to manage a funnel or a pipeline. Every single product is going to have some sort of funnel that they're managing. If you're selling to businesses, it's a sales process where there's a top of the funnel, right? Where you're initially reaching out, then maybe you're giving a demo, then maybe you're talking to decision makers, finally you're closing them. Might take a couple months. If you're selling a consumer product, maybe they come on your website through an Instagram post, they sign up for an newsletter, they get emailed a couple times, and then they buy the product, right? So most companies, whether it's a marketing process or sales process or a combination of both, what they're really doing is they're managing pipelines and managing funnels. So if you're looking to pick up that skill, you should go and work for a company in either a marketing job or a sales job where you're understanding the different components of that funnel and figuring out how do you get people at the top, and then how do you actually push people down to make a sale. In the example of that person that he mentioned who was selling the product for parents and their kids, she would literally go at night and before bed, after she put her kids to bed, she would message these accounts like right from her bed. She would message 50 at least a day. And this wasn't like she wasn't messaging Kim Kardashian. It was like somebody with 10,000 followers, maybe 20,000 followers, micro accounts, but enough where they were really passionate about, let's say, childhood education, and they wanted to share that with other moms on their Instagram account. And then they would organically do it because they got this free product, and eventually they grew over and over. But that was the top of the funnel for her, is let me get in front of people, customers through Instagram. They then go on our website, we capture them as a potential lead, and they buy the product as well.
By the way, even if you get a BDR or SDR, sales development role at a company where essentially you're doing a lot of cold calling, you're not really involved in the sales process, you can then leverage your role to learn a lot from the higher ups in the company. So be inquisitive, ask as many questions as you can. If you're not clear about parts of the sales process or the marketing funnel or whatever it is, get meetings on the calendar with your manager or the manager's manager, whoever is willing to meet with you, or a senior salesperson. Ask these questions. It's the only way to ultimately learn about these things, is to learn from other people. You can do that in a role. You can do that through informational interviews. Even if you're not in that role, start reaching out to people on LinkedIn, ask them about their jobs. If it's a marketing job, ask them about, how they figured out their marketing funnel. If it's for a startup, right? One of the best ways to learn is to learn directly from these other people. So whether you do it on the job or not, try to connect with folks and download as much data as possible for them. But remember, it's going to be different for every single company and organization. Even in sales, there's different sales cycles. Sometimes there's multiple stakeholders. Sometimes you're just selling to one person, right? So that is something that is going to evolve over time. If you're a startup founder and a non-technical startup founder, and part of your job is to get customers, it's all about running multiple experiments over time. So we're going to pause right now. And does anybody have any questions about this final section?
Sales and marketing is definitely the difficult thing to learn. There's so many different jobs within that function. As you build your business, you're going to be hiring a bunch of people within those roles as well. But it's also one of the most critical ones to learn if you're going to be a founder, and what it takes to actually get a business off the ground. So questions about the sales and marketing process and getting your first customer?
Okay. And if you don't have any questions right now, that's totally fine. Sometimes it's tough to think of these things on the spot. Some of you hopefully are working on startup ideas or thinking about startups or maybe joining other startups, right? So we want to be a resource for you. You have our contact information. You are on the calendar invite for this event, so feel free to reach out to us. You also see here, Kristen was kind enough to paste the relevant links for this conversation today. One is a link to the program application. We have a deadline coming up on Monday. And two, please fill out the survey if you got value from this event, and also to get access to the recording of this event. And as Kristen said, if you want to get updates on future events, please do follow us on Instagram. That's School16 Co. to stay up to date. Kristen, thank you so much for your help running this event and keeping time on track. Thank you so much, folks, for joining us today. Nicholas, thank you for your time as well. We hope everybody has a great night. And again, feel free to reach out to us with any questions or thoughts or comments. We do want to be there to support you all. But thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Great meeting all of you.
Thank you, guys.
Cheers. Thanks, Vlad.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you.
Thanks.